It's a really surprising thing that Herod is anxious to see Jesus. He really wants to see Jesus. He really wants to have an encounter with him because of everything that he has heard. But we have to be careful here because many people want to see Jesus, but for different reasons. Many people want to have an encounter with Jesus for different reasons. And of course, I think the reason behind why Herod would want to see Jesus is because he has heard all the things that he's doing, and he wants to see all those things. He wants to see it by himself. And if we continue this gospel and we go almost before the persecution of Jesus, in Luke chapter 23, verse 8, we hear that Pilate sent Jesus to Herod because Herod was in charge of Galilee, and Pilate was told that Jesus was a Galilean. So he sent Jesus to Herod. And the gospel says that when Herod saw Jesus, he was so happy because he's been looking for him for a very long time. And he was wishing that he was hoping that God is going to perform one of these signs that he has heard about. And he kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And in verse 9, we hear that Jesus was silent. Jesus was silent. What does that tell us? Herod was looking for Jesus for a wrong reason. In John's Gospel, chapter 1, we hear that the two disciples of John went in search of Jesus. They were looking for Jesus for the right reason. They wanted to have an encounter with him. And Jesus asked them, "What are you looking for? What are you looking for?" And they said, "Lord, where do you live?" And Jesus said, invited them in. "Come and you would see." Also in John's Gospel chapter 3, we find Nicodemus coming in the middle of the night in search of Jesus. He wants to have an encounter with Jesus that would change his life. So he comes in search of Jesus. We find in Luke's Gospel chapter 19, Zacchaeus, a tax collector, he has heard a lot about Jesus, but he wants to have a glimpse of him. And he does everything possible to see Jesus. He goes and climbs a tree so that he could see Jesus. And because of his effort, Jesus invited him in. And he said, "I am going to spend this day with you, Zacchaeus, because of your seeking." So when you think about these three people, the two disciples of John, find Nicodemus and Zacchaeus, the way they are seeking, they are anxious to see Jesus, not the same way that Herod wants to see Jesus. Herod wants to see Jesus because he wants to see signs and wonders. And unfortunately, this has become the way in which we also want to have an experience with God. A lot of people would go to churches because of the signs and wonders. And what does Jesus say about signs? This wicked generation, you are looking for a sign. The only sign that will be given you is the sign of Jonah. For the way Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days, that is how the Son of Man would be in the heart of the earth for 3 days. What does he say? The only sign you've been given, the sign that we only have, the sign that we could hold on to, is the sign of the death and the resurrection of Jesus. There is nothing beyond that again. If you're looking for another thing, maybe you want to go to that pastor who makes the blind to see, who makes the dead to hear. Do we really need that in order to believe that Jesus is God? Do we really need that in order to believe that Christ saved us? Do we really need to believe that in order to know, to be assured that Jesus has promised us that he would be with us until the end of time? Many people give up their faith because they have not seen. So we are not different in that way from Herod, who just wants a sign. And I always consider it a very dangerous thing when people pray and they tell God, "God, give me a sign." Many people are very used to that. "God, give me a sign." So, no, you don't need a sign. You just need to believe. You need to know that God is with you. Jesus has promised that he would be with us until the end of time. Do we really need signs? And when we begin to seek signs, what is the response of God? Silence. Silence. God will give us a sign when He wants to. We must not go seeking for signs, seeking for miracles, seeking for wonders in order to believe. We do not need that in order to believe. Jesus has already given us enough to believe that He is Lord. Enough to believe that He will never leave us or forsake us. Enough to believe that He is loving and He is merciful. Enough to believe that He is God. We do not need any other signs. So it is not about what a priest can do. If I was to celebrate Mass now, I tell you, if I was to celebrate Mass now and there was somebody who could not walk and I pray over that person and the person starts to walk, you wouldn't imagine the number of people who will be here in church tomorrow. When people begin to know that Father Tony is performing miracles, many people would come, not because they want to have an encounter with God, but maybe they want to have an encounter with Father Tony. And the attention switches from Father Tony, from God to Father Tony. And I tell you, believe me or not, the devil still has powers to do that. The devil can still perform miracles. And there have been evidences of even powerful men of God who go to seek powers. And those powers are even devilish at times. So that they perform miracles, and many people can come to their church, and then they can get a lot of money and they get a lot of things or manipulate the people because of the signs that they perform. This is one thing we need to be careful about. And the good thing is that we are not really badly off as Catholic Christians because we stick to our faith, we stick to the Eucharist, we stick to what we listen to, we stick to the traditions of the church. There's something that we find in the Protestants, it's called church hopping. You hop from church to church. When you see this pastor is not doing very well, you go to another church. And if he's not doing well, you go to another church. And even if he's doing well and another pastor comes who is performing miracles, you go to that church because you're seeking that. We have to be careful about that. And this is why Herod was seeking Jesus, not because he wanted to have an encounter with him, but because he wanted a sign. He wanted a miracle from Jesus. And the answer that Jesus gave to him was silence. When we begin to seek signs, then we can be sure that God is not going to answer that. It's not just going to give you what you want. We have to believe. We don't need signs in order to believe again. We are walking already by faith and not just by sight. We pray therefore that God will grant us a deeper faith to believe in Him, irrespective of what we see, what we hear, that we will believe that He is there with us until the end of time as He has promised.